All right, welcome everybody to TechCon 2025. This session is on App Connect Enterprise version 13, and joining us today is Ben Thompson, Chief Architect. If you saw yesterday's sessions, Ben was leading the charge in one of them yesterday. If you haven't seen it, go back to your session catalog after this and look for that session. There should be slides and downloads and videos there for you to access. So Ben, I'm going to hand it over to you. Everyone, if you've got questions, please put them in the chat. Ben will tackle them at the end or have a look at the end. So please stay engaged. There will be a couple of demos and things to look at. So this isn't just going to be Ben and slides. It's going to be, you're going to see products in action with the new version. So Ben, go ahead.
Thank you, Frank. Yep. So yeah, we've got quite a lot to get through today, packed agenda. So I'm going to be going at a relatively fast pace. So if anybody's on the call and is already familiar with ACE, then you can maybe snooze a little bit for the first 10 minutes, but after that, there's going to be some great stuff that will interest you as well. We're going to be using hopefully 3 different demos today. They're all pre-recorded, so they're the best kind of demos. They're definitely going to work. And they also have audio commentary. They have my dulcet tones over the top of them. So we're going to be attempting to get that work towards the end of the presentation, about halfway through. There's the first one, then some at the end. If by any chance my timing is off today and we don't get to those, never fear, they're also available on YouTube and you can catch up with those at a later date. So with that in mind, let us get going. So today's agenda is going to start with a brief introduction to what App Connect Enterprise is. Very fast on that one, just in case we've got any entirely new users with us today. We're then going to do an overview of the core parts of version 13, which is our latest engineering release that came out in September of last year. And then we're going to look at some demos, and really we're diving deeper on the most recent features that were added in 13.020. That release came out at the end of last quarter, at the end of December. We're due a next release in about a week's time. So there's lots of developers that are rather busy right now in rooms adjacent to me working on that release. And that one will hit the streets very soon. So yes, please look out for that too. So with that in mind, very fast introduction to ACE, or App Connect Enterprise, to use its full name. We've had a lot of different names over the years, and we've been around for quite a while. So we've been in market for about 25 years. And as the chart says here, we have restlessly reinvented ourselves over that time period. Really, throughout that time, we've always been about routing and transformation, as you might expect from an integration engine. We've also, given that we're written in C++, we're particularly high performance. So this is really about getting data from A to B in a very fast style, with all different kinds of protocols and message formats supported. Really, that's been the same throughout all of the different eras. So when we think about the API economy these days, you think about microservices and the buzzwords of today, containerization that we were talking about yesterday. Really, within all of those places, integration is still just about getting different applications to talk to one another more effectively. And that's remained a constant through our history. As was mentioned, I was talking about containers yesterday. Today, I'm going to do more of a focus on traditional software. But because of the nested doll approach that we take to the release of App Connect Enterprise, you get the benefit of these features in each of our 3 different form factors. So this isn't just about the software, it's also about passing that up into our certified container platform on OpenShift or other variants of Kubernetes, and also our managed service up on the public cloud. And as we talked about these 3 different form factors, it's also worth mentioning that just on premise itself, the same functionalities that we have within the core enterprise software products, they also go through into the Cloud Pak for integration as well. So for those of you that are running under Cloud Pak for integration licenses, you also get all of the myriad benefits of ACE in each of those form factors. We're going to be diving quite a lot on the world of connectors today. We're going to be talking about the built-in Vault. We're also going to be talking about the latest in the integration server process itself. So we're going to have plenty of opportunities to visit each of the kind of blocks that you can see on this architecture picture. And given the amount of content that we've got coming, I'm just going to move rapidly along and focus our attention on the later charts that follow. So ACE 13, that's one of our major engineering releases. Typically, we pull these to market roughly every 3 years. So the architecture of ACE 11, ACE 12, and ACE 13 is very similar In each of those form factors, we have a very common administrative API. We use the same kind of files to describe the personality of our integration servers, our server configuration YAML files. And what's also in common between each of these releases is the idea that every quarter we will have a modification release expressed by the third digit. So the last one of those that I was mentioning in the intro, 13.0.2.0, and we pull those to market every 3 months. So a good drumbeat of new features all the way through this life cycle. We've still got version 12 in market as well. That's looking distinctly middle-aged right now. So that one is really, that's a stream, if you like, is really all about maintenance at this stage. Vast majority of our users either already on 13 or in the process of migrating sometime soon before we reach end of service deadlines of standard support of version 12, which will come next year, so in early 2026 in April time. So good lifespan to these products. H13, an excellent time to adopt because it's already been in market for a few months. It's got lots of new features still coming. So yeah, really great time to get engaged in the world of version 13. And if we do kind of a quick recap, for those that perhaps haven't got the time to listen to the whole talk today, I wanted to pull out here a few highlights, and we're going to dive deeper on some of the topics on this chart later on. So maybe if I pull out just a couple that I'm not going to get to talk about in detail later. We have a new patterns gallery that's provided in our toolkit. This enables you to get up and running with a product even quicker than in the past, where we have a choice of 92 different patterns, which can help you do very simple kind of use cases like transform protocol, transform format. And we're going to add to those patterns over time as well throughout the 13 lifecycle. Another one that's shown in the top right corner, we've extended our set of database support to also incorporate PostgreSQL. And we're using that now for the business transaction monitoring feature that comes with the product. We've also extended what you can do there with dynamic procedure calls, dynamic stored procedure calls for PostgreSQL. That was another feature that we had in 13.02. There is actually a video of that one up on YouTube, but it's one that's not quite made the cut for today. So if there are any budding users of Postgres, please go check that one out. I think most of the other topics on this chart we will actually talk to in either less or more detail as we go through. But one thing that I did want to just dally on very briefly, I know in these kind of presentations, sometimes folks get a little bit frustrated if all we talk about is the past. They also like to have a little bit of a sneaky glimpse into the future. And whilst we can't make commitments for what's coming this year, nor can we express precise timelines, we can give you a flavour of the kinds of thing that we're thinking about. So I'm sure it will be of no surprise to anybody to see that AI makes an entry on this chart. And we think there's a real opportunity for using AI in order to help developers get up and running with the product more quickly. So providing a built-in widget as part of your toolkit experience to help you develop ESQL in order to use within your flows, that is high on our radar right now. Closely followed by the SQL idea is essentially doing the same thing, but with Java code. So users of Java compute nodes who'd like specific help with our own libraries for navigating through the tree structure, that's one to look out for. We hope sometime this calendar year. Another couple that are coming more recently, we're the proxy support for the Salesforce input and request node. That's something that we've been working on for the last couple of months, and we're hoping very much that will ship within our 13.03 release, coming out in about a week's time. So that one should be a lot sooner to deliver than some of the others on the chart here. Likewise, the HTTP request node feature that's name dropped here, this is about retrying connections when you get a 500 status code or something of that nature from a back end. And we've added some extra parameters onto that node to ease that sort of retry. There may be folks who've used ACE for some time on the call today, and if you're in that category and you've used our embedded global cache capability, you'll be pleased to see that we're looking to upgrade that from using extreme scale libraries to provide a built-in proprietary ACE solution as part of the product, so no additional charge there to use that. And again, that's one that we're hoping to bring to market very soon in the next couple of weeks with the 13.03 release. If you prefer to use an external cache, we're also going to look to integrate with Redis for the first time there as well. So lots to look forward to. As usual, lots of new connectors coming. The first on the list there, Workday, is the one that's most likely to ship first out of that list. But again, we've got lots of plans for later in the year as we bring on board some new connector development kit nodes. These are essentially connectors that have been written using our own CDK functionality and that you can also exploit as a user. So we've got lots of new connectors coming in our pipeline there. I'm going to leave those kind of tidbits hanging around what we might do in the future and cast our mind back to when version 13 first came to market. And that, as I said, was in September of last calendar year. And we try to align our features to the 3 different themes that you can see on the chart here. So a lot of what we do is about simplification. And in a moment, we're going to be talking about the designer authoring tool, which is the first time we've shipped that as part of our core traditional software offering in version 13. So we're going to see a demonstration video in just a moment that highlights one of those use cases using that designer to do some simple development of a message flow. We're also constantly evolving, so that often means new connectors, as I just mentioned. So we've got Couchbase connector that was new in this release, lots of others that have come across recently over our last several mod releases over the last couple of years. I think we're up to over 200 nodes now. We'll see that on the next chart. Finally, the protection of your investments. So we want you to be able to take existing flows that you've worked long and hard at creating and always pull those forward. And that applies across all of our different form factors as well. So regardless of whether you choose to invest in the new designer technology or whether you're an avid user of our toolkit, we're bringing new features to both of those platforms, and that can then protect your investment even if you later on want to start moving around, if you want to go from traditional software to containers, or if you want to go to public cloud. So lots of good reasons to stick with the technology over a long period of time, like many of our users fortunately do. We're going to be talking about Java 17 today as well. So that's also about keeping up to date with the most modern of standards and using the embedded technologies in the way that you would hope. And yeah, I can give you some more details on the timing involved with the Java 17 capabilities as we go through. So I've mentioned connectors already a couple of times, and we've been on kind of a long-term journey here regarding how we use connectors within our portfolio. For those that have stuck with the product for a long time, you'll be familiar with the idea that we have many of our connecting options written in C++ as part of our core engine or using Java. But increasingly, we're also using JavaScript connectors with the product as well. And JavaScript connectors have been these contributing mod releases. You can see how we've been growing that since version 12 came to market. So through each of the mod releases since 12.05, we've put real effort and attention into growing those connectors list. So you can see now we struggle to get them onto one chart in small enough, big enough print for you to be able to read everything. So lots of investment there in the connectors, and that will continue as we move forward. So you saw some of the names that I dropped on the previous chart, and we think particularly in the area of RAG patterns and the use of AI. There's a few that are coming very soon that we're very interested in. We've also provided the Watson X AI connector recently, and that one again has proved very popular for our users. So that's the connectors area of the product. If I just get my mouse sorted out, what you've also got here is a bunch of links, and again, quite a dull chart, but if anybody wants to screen capture, you can grab the links here. Every single one of the mod releases that we provide, we blog about all of the latest features. So if anything today doesn't take your fancy, or there are other things that I've name dropped that I haven't got the time for the detail on, then please do go check out these blogs. And of course, our associated YouTube channel. We've got lots of videos that present all of the latest content. So please do take a look at that. Those mod releases go back into the version 12 timeframe as well. So at the point where we switched our development focus from the version 12 stream into version 13, that was where you started seeing all of the new mod releases really ramp up there. And so what we'll be doing with these blogs is really focusing on the 13 content for the rest of our life cycle of the products that we were describing earlier. So lots of extra content that you can get hold of there. We will be sharing these charts after the call. So apologies if they're not yet available for download, but yes, nothing protected here today. You will be able to get a copy. So we're going to dive into some of the 1302 features, and I just wanted to quickly put this up here again, just to have a bit of a list of those that I'm not going to get around to. We augment these charts every single time we do a mod release, so you're going to see more detail in each of these areas as we go through. I'm not going to dally too long here, other than to say the ones that we'll focus on today in particular are Avro and our exploitation of schema registry nodes. So when we're connecting to Kafka, we can make pushes that use the Avro serialization format, and we can also gather back meta model descriptions of that data from schema registries that we can talk to as well. And we'll also be doing a demonstration of some small changes to the TCP nodes later on, where we've got fractional timeouts involved. And one to pick out here on OpenTelemetry, we've added some extra enhancements to the way that we can transmit authentication headers as part of the OTel messages. I've got a presentation tomorrow all about OTel that's dedicated to OpenTelemetry. So again, I'm going to steer clear of any more detail on that topic for today. So just as a bit of an introduction, we have these two different authoring capabilities in the product. They both enable you to create flows, and you can see in the diagram at the base of the chart that the flows look pretty similar. But when you go down into the details, there are a few important differences. So when we talk about the traditional toolkit flows, here you can have multiple wires coming out from an individual node in the flow. You can also do quite sophisticated try-catch handling with rollback of exceptions and catch it at earlier points in the flow. But we think there's a space here for business technologists who prefer their coding and their flows to be a little bit more straightforward. And that was the reason why Designer was invented. And in the version 13.01 release, for the first time, we provided this to our software users. And we're going to see a demonstration of Designer in just a moment. Designer is able to be a lot more simple to get up and running for a user. And the way that they launch it is also very straightforward from your platform. Unlike the toolkit, you don't have to set up any runtime when you launch Designer for the first time. It just comes to life and everything operates from that point forward. And with that in mind, it's probably good at this point that I actually switch to a demonstration of that and you'll get the best idea. This isn't actually, the video lasts for 8 minutes, but we're only going to watch about the first 4 of this one. So I'm just going to bring that up in a media player and it will be my voice that you hear in commentary over the video. Most of the examples that we're going to be dealing with today relate to the Enterprise Toolkit. But first off, we're going to use an example that focuses on Designer. Designer was new as an authoring tool in version 13 for software, and you can see from the Windows Start menu here, I'm launching the Designer process. And this actually involves running an integration server under the covers. The integration server itself is used to provide a local testing facility for Designer flows. And when it launches up, the server also serves the pages that we're looking at here in the web browser. The first thing that I'm asked for is a vault key. And the vault key is needed because I'm going to secure away some credentials and I want those to be encrypted. And so those credentials are going to be used when talking to third-party systems. I need to store them safely. Within the Designer UX itself, there's several different tabs. I can create new flows from scratch. You can see here they might be event-driven flows or flows through an API. And regardless of the type of the flow, I've also got the option of using a catalog of connections. There are several connections that you could see there that I've already created ahead of time. And here we see an absolutely new page for 13.020 involving templates. Templates provide a filtering mechanism, so I can type single words such as MailChimp or Salesforce, and I can add multiple terms as well. So in this particular case, we're going to look for a template for integrating Salesforce with Slack. There are still lots of options available. And one of these relates to having a notification sent when a new Salesforce opportunity is created. We can read about the template, and then by clicking the button to use the template, we go off to public GitHub and gather back some artifacts. And when they've been brought into the Designer here, it's been clever enough to already assign individual accounts. You'll see that each of the nodes has Salesforce 1 and Slack 1 written against it. In the case of the Slack node, we need to have more than the account information that can talk to Slack. We also need to define this node with some of the important parameters specific to me. In this case, I'm choosing to send a Slack message to a channel, and I've got a drop down giving me the different available names of the channels that I've got in my Slack system. So what we're going to do here is actually test out this message flow. We're going to click on test, and this puts the flow into a started state using the integration server under the covers to actually run and support the flow. Having put it into testing mode, we're now going to generate some data that will cause the flow to get triggered. We're actually going to do that directly from Salesforce. So I've navigated in my web browser here into the Salesforce system, and we're going to go through a few menus in order to generate a sales opportunity. This is going to be related to my account called Ben's Account 1, and you can see in the opportunity list here there are several that have already been created. We're going to create an entirely new one that I'm going to give the cunning name of Demo Sales Op. And Demo Sales Op is relating to a particular closure date, so I can specify that using the calendar function that we've got inside here. And for every opportunity, there is also associated a stage. This tells us what stage the opportunity has reached. In this particular example, I'm going to pick qualification. I've got a probability chance of it closing, and I can provide an amount field that says how much this opportunity might be worth. In this case, it's quite a successful start to the year. £100,000 is this opportunity. So having saved that opportunity within Salesforce itself, we can then return to App Connect Enterprise Designer and go to the activity log. And by doing a refresh, we can see what activity that has generated in the message flow. In the middle of the page there, you can see that the connector Slack has successfully been invoked with an action to create a message, and that's given us a successful status code. So if we switch to the Slack UI, you can see that the message has come through, new opportunity with the opportunity number that's been sent through as a message there as a good notification that Salesforce has had this opportunity created. So a relatively straightforward, simple example. We're going to crank things up a little bit with a little bit more logic involved in the message flow. And to do that, we're going to go into a slightly different template. So at that stage, I will kill that demonstration. I think we've seen enough of a very simple example of using Designer, using a template there. So rather than look at the extended example, it's better that we focus some of our time and attention today on some other topics. So with that, I just switch around my screen again, and we'll take us on to the next couple of charts that we want to go through. So having talked about Designer, we've obviously got the alternate side to our universe, which is for integration specialists and the use of our traditional toolkit tool. And when version 13 came along, we upgraded the toolkit to be the latest available level of Eclipse at the time. So that's from March 2024, and that was Eclipse version 4.31. And we have some new features, as you might expect. It's a continuing evolving platform. The ones that are more notable here is that you can now connect to external directory vaults where you hold credentials directly from your toolkit. So if you're using toolkit to do development, you'd like to deploy to a server and you wanted to create some credentials inside that server, doing that directly in a graphical way from the toolkit is now possible. And we'll see an example of that in some of the later examples that we're running as demos, and you can see a little picture of it at the bottom of the chart here as well. Another notable enhancement in the toolkit is that we now have a new kind of transformation node in version 13. It's called a JSON-ARTA mapping node. And this has a very similar look and feel to the kind of mappings that you may have been familiar with using in the Designer. So we're letting the world of Designer also influence our design thinking when it comes to the way to interact with more integration specialists. And this is enabling you to have kind of spreadsheet layout views when you're mapping source to target data within the toolkit. Lots of other things besides. So we've got eSQL Content Assist. So ESQL users have not been left behind here for the JSON domain. That's another small but important addition that came with version 13. And we've already mentioned the patterns today and some of those connectors. So lots of great stuff coming in the toolkit. Now, given we've talked today about the Designer, and we've also talked about the toolkit, I wanted to very briefly mention a phrase that you might see us mentioning a little bit more over the next 12 months, and that's what we call the converged runtime. Now, there can be some confusion when you talk about converged runtime, because actually here we're really just talking about the integration server. So the process that everybody knows and loves is capable of executing both the different kinds of flow type that we've been describing. So when we were running Designer in the demo just a moment ago, and we were putting that data through the Salesforce to Slack message flow, that flow was actually executing inside an integration server process. So even though we have two different tooling options, the runtime that supports the execution of those flows, it's exactly the same as the traditional runtime that you all know and love that you've used for many years. And given that, what we've actually done with the product is we've built a couple of layers in there that enables us to interpret the design time artifacts. So genuinely, this is not converting the build time artifact of one flow type into another and then deploying it to a common runtime. This is genuinely teaching our runtime process all about those different flow types. And that's quite a powerful message, particularly when we think about where we might go next with the product. So the purpose of this chart is really to set the scene for some of those things that are going to come later. So we've talked about the fact that in each of these three pictures, we've got the toolkit and we've got the Designer. And if we look at the far right-hand side, before we had this capability to run all Designer flows inside the integration server process, we were reliant on some extra Node.js processes that actually run inside containers. So for users of our A-certified container platform, you may have noticed us needing to start several containers in order to support particular flow types. And subtly over time, we're actually changing which servers need to be started. And you can see the before and after views here. And as usual on an architecture diagram, less is more. So having to start up less containers and run more things all inside the same process enables us to lower the footprint size that we require as a product. So this is really all about ACE becoming leaner, our ability to run these flows of different types all very quickly and easily without consuming extra footprint. So we've talked a lot about tooling. Let's move on to a slightly different topic. So ACE version 13 enables you to deploy flows that utilize both Java 8 and Java 17. Now, the way that we've done that is within a particular integration server, you have a particular level of Java. So it's not possible to mix and match within one integration server. We expect the vast majority of our users to use Java 17, which is the default JRE version when you create a new server with the new platform version. There may be a subset of our users that are not happy with that though, and would rather still stick on the older Java 1.8. Now, unfortunately, that's not going to be possible forever, but it is possible for a while longer. And it was for this reason that we made a statement of direction in December of last calendar year, right at the end of last year, about what you can expect at what time. And you can see on the graphic on the right-hand side that there's a few items that are currently marked no. And what that's basically saying is there are some areas of our product code base that don't currently operate with Java 17 successfully. The first of those that we want to talk about today is the global cache. Excuse me. The global cache, we have said, is being upgraded to work with Java 17. That one is due out very, very soon. And as part of that implementation, we'll be able to put a big, nice green tick box in that corner. There's a couple of others around the WSRR nodes and our Corba nodes where we're not convinced that keeping further investment in those areas is worth it for our users. So one thing that the statement of direction goes into are some time periods where you can expect those particular niche parts of the product to be removed over time. There's then a third set of capability, which is going to take us a little bit longer to bring to market, and we wanted to give our users plenty of notice about. And that's the use of WS Trust, WS Security, and secured SOAP services, essentially. And that capability is something that we're working on right now. It's likely to be brought to market as part of our release at the end of this calendar year. It's probably going to be, I'm just trying to do the maths in my head, 13.0.6.0. So we're coming up to 13.03 release at the end of first quarter. So by the time we wind through to December, 13.06 is our current expectation. For anybody who wants more detail on that, we've got the statement of direction that is fully public. Anybody can go down to the web address that's shown on the chart here, read more about those various stages. It's just a little bit of an advance warning that you might want to think about levels of Java that you're using. And the next topic here is also about change that came about with version 13 for the first time, which we think is getting the balance right between a good reliant service that you can have good quality security with against ease of use getting up and running out of the box. And we've provided with the 13 release a new capability to secure admin SSL by default. And what that involves is when you install a product these days, we generate a self-signed certificate that's got a very long expiry that will last through the various ACE 13 mod releases and fix packs. And we then use that certificate by default when we're securing administrative access to your server from a remote machine. And that's been applied at various levels of the product. So we've got that support there for integration nodes, independent integration servers, designer, and dashboard. And so what that's then required from us is some improvements to our commands where you're doing remote deployment and remote connections. So the IBM int deploy command had some new features in 13.02 in order to allow you to then make these secure connections more easily with the extra flags that you can see on the chart here. We're going to be extending similar capabilities and similar flags with a bunch of other commands, which are due to ship in our 13.03 release as well in a week's time. So lots of good stuff coming there in the area of commands. Also bear in mind, if you're not happy with having things secured in this way by default, you can of course switch everything off and return to the way that the product used to be, where it won't take any account of those certificates. So we've got those IBM int commands shown at a high level on the chart here. Lots more detail that's provided as part of our documentation in that space as well. So that's the area of SSL, and the next part, we're now going to enter into some fast and furious demos. So we've got 3 topics which we'll attempt to get through. We'll take a time check. I think we've got time for that, and as well as some questions at the end, should there have been any. I'm keeping half an eye on the chat in the background here. And so the first one of these demos relates to our Kafka support. We've had Kafka nodes in the product for quite some time. We've got a Kafka consumer node for the beginning of a flow, a producer node for a mid-flow or the end of the flow, and a Kafka read node as well, which can take a specific message from a Kafka topic. In addition to those existing nodes, we've now added this extra support for being able to serialize into the Avro format. So you can see some properties that are shown here that we'll dive into in the demo in just a moment, which enable us to declare an interest in a particular schema that's stored inside an Avro schema registry. So we're going to see that in action with the demo. So just bear with me 1 second whilst I queue that up. So I'm just going to bring up Windows Media Player, and you'll hear my voice kick in on the new video. In this demonstration, we're going to be looking at an example of a toolkit message flow utilizing our Kafka producer node with some new settings to allow for Avro serialization and integration with schema registries. And we're going to be playing around with the message flow that's shown on the screen right now. And this is receiving HTTP input. We've got some settings set up to parse the input data using the JSON domain and validate that message against the JSON schema. It's describing a citizen who's got a name, an age, and a location. So 3 very simple fields just to demonstrate the concept of some modeled data. And this input JSON message is passed in the JSON domain and passed on to the Kafka producer node, who has a topic configured, and that topic exists within a replicated cluster, which is actually using event streams as part of an OpenShift deployment. We've also got the name of a Kafka event streams scram policy. This is essentially containing all of the details for how the message flow should communicate with that Kafka broker. So we've got a bootstrap servers property. We've chosen to use SASL SSL. We have some security settings, including a security identity, my Kafka sec ID. This is reflected as well as the Kafka trust identity in some credentials that we've already got set up and stored away inside our directory vault. You can see my Kafka sec ID and Kafka trust have already been defined. We've actually got a third credential as well, which is for interacting with a schema registry. More on the registry later. On the basic tab then, we're using the My Topic destination for that Kafka producer node, and on the Avro tab, which is an entirely new set of properties, you'll see we've chosen a serialization mode of default. We've then got the name of a policy, and again we'll be using the policy later when we interact with the registry. Choosing the default serialization mechanism essentially means that when we pass the JSON message into the node, we will attempt to serialize the data as JSON when we write it to the Kafka topic. So having deployed the flow and put it into recording mode, we're going to interact with that event streams registry and with the event streams Kafka brokers. If we first of all go to the topics section of the UX here, we can see that my topic has been defined, and currently there are 2 separate messages already defined on that topic. We're going to see that number increase when we run 2 tests in a moment. So the first of those tests is going to involve injecting the JSON data into the flow, and this will then serialize the JSON and we'll get a JSON message put onto the Kafka topic. So if we go into the flow exerciser, we can pass in the values of Ben, who's always age 21 and located in Hursley. And we can see that the response message has just simply been echoed back at the end of the flow through the HTTP reply node. But then if we go and investigate the topic and refresh the screen, we can see that the third message has now arrived. And when we click on that message, you can see that the same data has now been published to the topic. So that's a very straightforward example showing that we can successfully connect to event streams. And now we'll turn our attention to the schema registry part of the demonstration. In the schema registry, you can see I've got defined here a schema for a person. This particular schema is an example of an Avro schema. So this is slightly different to a JSON schema. It looks very simple at first glance, very much similar in concept, but it's essentially describing a different serialization mechanism. So when we write the data to the topic, this time around we're going to be writing it in an Avro format. But before we do that, we're going to use the administrative API for the event streams, and we're going to gather back information about that particular Avro schema that we've already placed in the registry. You'll see here it has a global ID, And the global ID is what we'll be using to highlight when we come to do the serialization, which schema it is that we'd like to use. So given that we've got this internal identifier, a global ID of 1, we're going to apply that to the Kafka producer node. If we take the message flow out of recording mode, we can then edit it. And if we look at the properties of the Kafka producer, we've got the serialization mode that we're now going to switch over to Avro. And in order to do that serialization, we need to gather back a schema, and we're going to use the schema ID of 1 in order to gather that back from the registry, in order to teach ACE how it should then serialize the data. Having applied that output, having deployed that flow, we're now going to send the same data through the message flow a second time around. But this time, rather than serializing to JSON, we will serialize the output to Avro. The JSON message itself is simply passed to the outside of the node, but if we now go into the Kafka topic itself, when we find the fourth message that's now sitting on that topic, you'll notice that it has a different value, and sure enough, it has been serialized with a formatted payload, which you can see there is definitely of Avro format. So in conclusion, what we've demonstrated here is the use of ACE with some new properties for Avro serialization and successful interaction with an event stream's Kafka broker capability and the event stream schema registry. Okay, so that's enough on that one. I'm just going to again change around my screen and we will queue up the next topic. So I think I'm sharing again successfully. So having talked through Kafka, one of those 1302 features, we're going to switch our attention to the TCP/IP message flow nodes. These nodes are particularly popular as a transport. We've got lots of capability inside the App Connect for Healthcare deliverable that relies on raw socket communications. Also, many of our more financially based customers who are interested in the ISO 8583 format are heavy users of these nodes. So we've got lots of interest out there with the TCP nodes. And when making these raw socket connections, there can be some situations where you'd like to use very, very small timeout values. Typically, the kinds of message flow that are involved with these sort of socket transformations, they require very fast performance. And in these situations, being able to express a very small timeout so that you can go back to a requesting client very quickly without waiting for a back end is sometimes more important than getting back the natural response that you would want to accept. So on the face of it, a very simple requirement here to allow us to express timeout values that are smaller, they're a fraction of a second, that can then be used in order to control the timeout when these different nodes talk to one another. So we're going to see an example of this in action, which is going to be using the HTTP transport to drive a couple of flows. So we're going to use a couple of flows together with one another and then look at the passage of data through those two flows in a couple of different varied ways. So I'm just going to queue that one up. And again, you will hear from me, but via a recording. This one should take us, again, roughly 5 minutes, I think we have for this one. So we're on track to allow some time for questions at the end. If anybody does have anything they'd like to ask and put into the chat in the interim, we will have time to tackle some of those at the end. Let me just demonstrate this one right. I'm just going to go into full screen mode as well on this, just to help things out. And again, here we go. So this demonstration uses an application called TCP/IP Demo that has already been deployed to our runtime server and consists of two separate message flows. The first is driven by an HTTP input, and the purpose of this flow is to track a set of behaviors using a bunch of trace nodes that all write output to the same file. We're going to see that in action later. The first core part of the flow uses a TCP server output node, which has been pre-configured with some connection details that are held within a TCP server policy. And it's the job of this policy to describe the port number and various other details about how to locate the other message flow. So here we're going over port 7778, as you can see with the first property of the policy. Immediately following that node is a TCP receive node, which has a timeout value, fractional timeout value, set to be ½ a second, showcasing the new feature. Aside from this, the way that the nodes are paired together means that the connections are not closed and the input and output streams are left unmodified,
so that we can receive a response back in the later node of the flow. Following the TCP receive node, we've got two different alternative branches in the message flow. One that occurs if the response comes back quickly in less than half a second, and the other that occurs if there is a timeout of more than half a second. So we'll see those two different behaviors in action that we drive through these different flows. And whether or not the timeout occurs really depends on the speed with which the back-end flow sends a response back to the first flow. And this is a dynamic behavior which is driven from the code inside this Java compute node. You can see the first job of the Java code is to gather from the input message one of the fields, which is called desired speed of flow. And this setting can either be set to the value fast or any other set of characters. In the case where we've requested a fast response, we go back immediately. But if any other value is placed in here, you can see we sleep for a period of 10 seconds, thus delaying the other actions that this message flow will take and responding slower back to the initial request. Again, we use trace nodes for everything this flow is doing. So in a moment, when we put data through these two message flows, we'll be able to see exactly what has occurred. At the very end of the flow, we also use a final trace node to record this flow is finished after it has sent its response back. We're going to place both of the message flows that we've discussed into recording mode. We don't need to redeploy them because we've already got the solution deployed, so we'll save ourselves a few seconds. We'll click on each one of the flows, put them into recording mode, and then we're going to inject some data using the built-in flow exerciser provided in the toolkit. We've got two prepared messages. The first of these is for a fast reply, and this value that's passed in through the JSON data will then be interpreted by the backend flow, and it responds immediately. You can see here that the HTTP client has received a message back straight away, but that doesn't tell us the whole story. We'd expect to have that message received back regardless of whether we hit the timeout, but you can see here, sure enough, that the passage of the data has gone down the top branch of the flow, and if we switch and look at the backend flow, we can see that there were no exceptions in this flow as well. If we turn our attention to the actual trace file that's been recorded and put this into full screen mode, you'll be able to see how long the message took to go through. And we really are talking a handful of milliseconds. In total, this whole test has taken about 19 milliseconds to go through both the invocation flow and the backend flow. And everything has happened in the order we would naturally expect. The invoke flow bookending the entries in this trace file with a backend flow in the middle. So at this stage, we've only done things very quickly. And now we're going to demonstrate the actual timeout using a second piece of data. And as mentioned, we can drive this again through the flow exerciser. We're going to put through a second message, but this time the JSON asks for the speed of delivery to be slow. And having passed this value through, we'll then amend the behavior dynamically of the Java compute node to inject the 10-second sleep. The response comes back immediately to the first flow because we've triggered a timeout. And if we now look at the picture of the flow, we can see that the bottom branch has been invoked. We've received a timeout from the TCP/IP server receive node after half a second, and that was what sent the response back over HTTP. The backend flow, again, has no exceptions within it. If we just view the path that the message has taken through, it was the same path that the first message went through. Nothing new to see there. And then if we go finally to reopen the same trace file, we can now see quite a big difference. When the backend flow was invoked, you can see it was very slow to respond. So in total, when we examine the timestamps, we can see there was a period of about 10 seconds over which the backend flow paused before finally responding. And in the interim period, the timeout occurred, and that was also recorded by the TCP/IP demo invoke flow. And that shows the behavior of using fractional timeouts with TCP nodes.
Okay, so that was our last but one demo for today. So I think we've got time for one more, and then with all of the rushing, I think we're not only on schedule, maybe a little bit early. So again, if there are any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. The last demo today, if I just queue that one up in just a moment, is going to revolve around dynamic credentials. So we mentioned earlier on that there is the ability to create credentials in a graphical way within the toolkit. So we're going to see the example of the wizard here inside the toolkit that enables you to create a new credential. And when you do that, the credential can be of various different types. I know in one of the presentations earlier today, there was some discussion over the command mqsi set db palms, which is a very long existing command that the product has had for creating credentials that are used to talk to third-party systems. So not just databases, but all kinds of different systems. And that mqsi set db palms command was created some time ago before attitudes to security are quite the way they are today. And those kind of credentials are obfuscated and they're certainly protected in terms of a proprietary algorithm, but they're not actually undergoing encryption when they get stored on the runtime system. So many users would prefer to adopt our secure vault, where symmetric encryption is being used. So these days, most modern installations would use a vault, and that could be one that's associated directly with a particular server. It could be used by an integration node, or it could be what we call an external directory vault. And as the name suggests, that enables you to place it on your file system in a different directory other than necessarily where your server or your node's working directory is stored. And what the external directory vault allows you to do is to not only create credentials and have them stored there, but then also enables you to have simultaneous access. You can do concurrent access by any different number of integration servers. So if you're looking for a way of easily sharing credentials around, then this might be a very natural choice that you might want to go for. So this isn't just about creating credentials, and it's not just about securing them safely. It's also about the dynamic nature of the updates that you might make to those credentials. Many of the different new connectors that we have involved with the product that we've been talking about today utilize credentials that are set to be dynamic. You can actually use a command to display whether a credential is static or dynamic, where a static credential requires the server to be restarted to accept its update, whereas a dynamic credential does not need that server restart. So what we're going to see here is an example of these dynamic credentials in action, and we're going to do that using a local security profile example where we're actually doing basic auth using an inbound structure coming into a flow. And so with that in mind, we will move to our final demo of today, and you'll return to me after that for a few closeout charts. So let me just get the last demo, and again, the next voice you hear will be mine on recording.
So here we are in the toolkit, and we're going to be looking at an example here of using the new dynamic credential support. And the flow that we're dealing with is going to use HTTPS to secure the input. And we can see on the input node, we have the name of a security profile policy. And this is a policy XML file that lives inside a policy project. And you can see here that we've got some settings for local authentication using a security identity, which is called my HTTP basic auth credential. And it's that credential that we're going to create by giving ourselves a username and password. In this particular case, we're using a local authentication mechanism. ACE actually provides for using remote providers as well. So if you prefer, you could use LDAP, you could use Tevley Federated Identity Manager, or you could use a secure token service that's capable of talking WS Trust if you prefer. But in this case, we're using this local ID that you can see we're typing in, which we've given the name Ben Thompson, and an initial password with a highly inventive name of initial password. We're going to be changing that password later on after we've made an update. So the initial password's been set up now, and if we refresh on the integration server that we'll be testing this with, we'll be able to see that the credential in the external directory vault has been successfully created. And next, we're going to do a drag and drop deploy of the application that contains the flow that we're going to be testing. And as we saw before, the flow is a very simple echoing flow that receives HTTP input and then echoes the response back again. And we're going to invoke that over curl. And to begin with, the user header that we're applying here, the authentication header, is actually providing the value, this is an invalid password. And unsurprisingly, to begin with, we're getting that 401 status code back saying that authorization is required. If we switch out that invalid password for the initial password that we just created, then we should get more success. So passing that through, you can see that hello world has been echoed back to the curl prompt. So this has proven that using a local identity is successfully enforcing that check using basic auth when we invoke the flow. So far, so boring. Now, if we then update the credential, we can see the power of having dynamic credentials for this localized authentication checking. So again, if we tick the box to show the password as we're typing it in here, you can see that we're now updating the password value to the equally inventive my new password. And having made that update without the requirement to restart the server, we can immediately return to the command line and attempt to invoke exactly the same service again. So this time we're using initial password to prove that the one that was previously successful is now giving us an authentication error. And then if we delete that password and put in the new password that we've just inserted, then we see success. And that concludes the demonstration showing dynamic credentials.
So that one was nice and short and sweet. So that's dynamic credentials. And that almost gets us to the end of our content today. So because I've been a little bit fast as I was going through, I just wanted to put up on screen here a quick YouTube link. This has in it not just the 3.5 demos that you've seen today. We have one on IBM Int Deploy, one on executing connector discovery, and one around connecting to a PostgreSQL database with dynamic stored procedure result sets. So more content there for anybody who is not sated by what they've seen so far today. I think that leaves us about 10 minutes for questions. I do note in the chat that I don't think many have been coming through so far, so I will just respond to what I've seen so far. So there was one asking about the chart deck. Apologies that wasn't up there ahead of time. That's me being tardy as a presenter, but you know, it keeps you all keen, definitely ensures that you'll turn up for the presentation. I will ensure that the website gets updated. If for any reason that you see any problem with that, please do feel free to email me directly, and I can always send you a copy of the charts that way too. There's another question that I see that's come along that's also asking about the AI feature for the ACE toolkit that I mentioned briefly at the beginning of the presentation. That particular feature is something that we are we haven't yet brought that to market. That was a forward-looking statement. We can't commit you a time frame on that one other than to say it is something that we're working on. IBM obviously has the Granite model that we're using for many of our AI capabilities these days, and we've been busy doing some training against that model in order to provide that capability. The plan there is for something to be available inside the toolkit experience, so it's designed to be there on your desktop in order to help you with the creation of eSQL. And it's likely to also include some kind of checking capability to ensure that what comes back from that model is valid and is good to use syntactically in terms of what your message flows actually do. At this stage, that's about all that I can share on that one. But if anybody is interested in more details, it also gives me a good opportunity to mention our early experience program. So ACE has an early experience program that anybody can join if you are willing to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And as part of that program, you not only get access to lots of videos and good lab guides where you can practice with the product entirely for free, no charge involved. It also gets you an invitation, if you would like to attend, to a summer workshop that we run here in the UK, in Hursley. And this year we're intending to run that workshop again. It's a face-to-face workshop. We're hoping that will be the date of the 23rd of June. In that particular week. It lasts for 5 days, and we're going to be sending out an email on that very, very soon. So we've got all the requirements in place to be sending out that mail very soon. So if you're not part of that early experience program, please do drop me an email or talk to your local IBM account representative, and we can get you registered there too. With that, that's all of the questions I can see. Let me just check in with Frank. I don't think I've missed any others. Is that right? Think not. I'm pretty sure. Oh, there's a couple extra here. Just while I've been talking, that's what happens. People raise others. So a few others to go through here. Okay. So somebody's asked about whether dynamic credentials works with a community version of Vault, or if it works with Vault Enterprise only. I think there may be some misunderstanding slightly around the different kinds of Vault that I mentioned there. So whether or not you're using our evaluation edition of the product, or if you're using our full edition of the product, both of those have the same functional capabilities. So that's included as part of ACE itself. So it's not an external Vault using a different technology. It's entirely built into the product. It's using our technology, and those dynamic credentials we're talking about, they work with that Vault. Now, the different types of Vault I was referring to, whether it's a server Vault, a node Vault, or an external directory vault, all of those also work with the dynamic credentials. So there's no differentiation there. I think the answer is basically a positive yes, it all works, but maybe there was a little bit of misunderstanding there around what the vault technology was precisely. So if that one doesn't answer, Rakesh, please feel free to join our office hours later today, where we can obviously go into more detail on that one. What else has there come through here? So there's been another question, a comment about integration community. So yes, please do join our community. There's a question about whether it's possible to update dynamically S3 credentials. I would need to go and check the precise list of which credentials are supported, but I'm pretty confident that as a discovery connector, that one is covered under the dynamic one. So I'll say hesitantly, yes, I think that is possible, but please do check me on that. It's the IBM int display credential types command that you require there if you're interested in checking yourself. But yeah, that's the one around S3. So yes, I think the answer is yes on that one, and I will check that as well myself later. So Rakesh has just followed up on the topic of whether the vault is part of ACE. Yes, this is right. It's part of ACE, Rakesh. It's not the HashiCorp vault. The IBM has obviously just completed purchase of HashiCorp. This is a built-in capability of ACE. So this is not the HashiCorp vault technology. This is ACE vault technology that we were using there and that we were referring to. There's another question around about a forecast for when ITX will be supported on ACE version 13. I'm afraid I can't give a commitment on that one. It's not the Hersey development team that produced that plugin, but I would say the last I spoke to the relevant team, they were aiming for a date around about the middle of this calendar year. So whilst that's not a commitment, that is our current best estimate for that piece of work. And so yes, that's the current expectation there. Typically, the support for the ITX plugin node tends to follow anything between 6 and 12 months after GA. So we're roughly on track for when we'd get that after a major engineering release version, as we've done historically. So yeah, apologies that wasn't there directly at GA, but that's very much in the works right now and is being worked on. As I say, middle of the year is my current expectation on that one. And I think that's all that we've got on the chat list, the questions list at the moment. Yeah, if there's anything else that comes to mind, please feel free to come along to our office hours session later, and we will answer anything